You are lying there with your phone face down, as if that could stop the waiting. The room is quiet, but your body is not. Your chest keeps listening. Your hand keeps reaching for a message that has not come. And the strange part is that you are not even sure what hurts more anymore, the silence itself, or the fact that some part of you still expects it to break. You told yourself you were done chasing. You told yourself you would not be the one to reach out again. Not this time, not after everything. But the moment you stopped, something in you became painfully aware of how much of your energy had been tied to that one screen, that one name, that one possibility. It is almost embarrassing how much a person can disappear into a waiting posture, how the whole body can start living like a suspended breath. And yet, this is not really about the phone. That is the first thing to see, because the phone is only the stage. The real drama is happening deeper, in a place that does not care about logic. Something old is being touched. Something in you is being activated every time someone withdraws, hesitates, goes quiet, or makes you feel like you have to earn your place in their life. This is where the inner marriage begins to matter. Not the romantic fantasy of two people finally becoming one. Something far more important than that. The inner marriage is the meeting between the part of you that reaches outward for validation and the part of you that knows, in its bones, that your value cannot live in another person's hands. Until those two parts meet, the chase never really ends. You may change the person. You may change the relationship. You may even change the story you tell yourself. But if the same inner split remains, the same hunger returns wearing a different face. Carl Jung understood something that most people feel but cannot name. When we are caught in a pattern that repeats, it is rarely because the other person has magical power over us. It is because they have touched a complex in us, a wound, a memory, a place where the psyche learned early that love might have to be pursued, proved, or earned through self-abandonment. That is why silence can feel so enormous. Not because the silence itself is always meaningful in the way your mind wants it to be, but because silence presses on the exact place where your old wound lives. It opens the door to the part of you that still believes, somewhere beneath all your adult understanding, that if you were more beautiful, more patient, more easy, more understanding, more available, more forgiving, more useful, then maybe you would finally be chosen without hesitation. And that belief is exhausting. It turns love into a performance. It turns longing into labor. It turns your nervous system into a waiting room. You start reading tiny signs like they are sacred messages, a delayed reply, a sudden view of your story, a brief like, a word that sounds warmer than usual, a message deleted, a name that appears and disappears. And because the unconscious speaks in symbols, your mind starts treating every fragment as if it must contain the truth. But here is the deeper truth, and it is more uncomfortable. Sometimes what you call chemistry is projection. Sometimes what you call destiny is an inner image looking for a body. Sometimes the person you cannot stop thinking about is not only a person at all. They are also carrying something you projected onto them. Your longing to be seen, your hunger to be chosen, your hope that someone outside you will finally make the inside feel safe. That is not a reason to shame yourself. It is a reason to wake up. Because projection is one of the most powerful forces in human life. We do not just see people as they are. We see them through the unfinished material in ourselves. We see them through old emotional maps. We see them through the places where the psyche never got closure. A man becomes more than a man when he is carrying your unmet need for certainty. A woman becomes more than a woman when she is carrying someone's need for rescue, tenderness, approval, or redemption. A silence becomes more than silence when it lands on a wound that has been waiting for years to be named. And then the whole relationship starts to feel faded, because it is no longer only about the two people in front of each other. It is about the unconscious meeting itself through them. This is why so many people cannot let go of the one who does not fully show up. Not because they are weak, not because they are foolish, but because the psyche attaches to unfinished emotional material with astonishing loyalty. It keeps returning to the scene, hoping for a different ending. The body remembers what the mind tries to minimize. Maybe you know that feeling. The way your stomach drops when you see the chat thread. The way your heart speeds up when the notification is not from the person you hoped for. The way your mind keeps building explanations, then tearing them down, then building them again. The way you can feel calm for half a day, and then suddenly become a child again in front of a silent screen. That is not because you are dramatic. That is because the complex has been touched. And a complex, once activated, does not behave like a reasonable adult. It behaves like a living knot of memory, emotion, expectation, and fear. It can make a grown woman feel 12 years old. It can make a strong person act like someone begging for scraps. It can make dignity feel distant, almost theoretical. That is why the chase is so seductive. Because chasing gives the complex a job. It gives anxiety a direction. It gives uncertainty something to do. If I just explain myself better, if I just send one more message, if I just stay warm enough, if I just disappear and let them miss me, if I just wait a little longer. The mind will invent almost anything to avoid the deeper grief, which is this. Maybe I have been trying to get from another person what I have not yet learned to give myself. That is the wound beneath the wound. And this is where the inner marriage becomes a psychological necessity, not a poetic idea. The inner marriage is what happens when the part of you that has been exiled by longing is finally brought back into relation with the part of you that can hold boundaries, reality, and self-respect without collapsing. It is the union of feeling and structure, softness and discernment, desire and dignity. Without that union, you keep outsourcing your center. You hand your emotional weather to people who may not even know they are holding it. You make another person responsible for your worth. And then you wonder why their inconsistency can shake you so deeply. Of course it shakes you. You have placed something sacred in a place that was never stable enough to hold it. This is where many people misunderstand the pattern. They think the pain is proof that the bond is deep. Sometimes it is, but sometimes the pain is proof that the wound is deep, and those are not the same thing. A deep bond can exist without making you disappear. A deep wound, when activated, can make every pause feel like abandonment, and every gesture feel like salvation. Carl Jung would not ask you to pretend the feeling is fake. He would ask you to notice what in you is being constellated, what image is rising, what old inner figure is stepping forward when the other person withdraws, what story your psyche is telling itself about love, worth, and survival. Because the psyche does not only want pleasure, it wants completion, and when it cannot find completion in the outer world, it keeps searching there anyway. That is why the chase can become almost ritualistic, not because it is rational, but because it is symbolic. Each message becomes a small attempt to reopen the door. Each check of the phone becomes a small prayer against being forgotten. Each overthinking session becomes a way of staying connected to the fantasy, even if the fantasy hurts. But the fantasy has a cost. It keeps you out of yourself. It keeps you from feeling the full ache of what is actually happening. It keeps you from asking the question that changes everything. Why does this silence matter so much to me? Not why are they silent? Why does their silence reach so far into me? That question is where the inner marriage begins. Because once you ask it honestly, you stop making the other person the whole story. You start seeing that something in you has been split. One part of you is still standing at the door, hoping to be chosen. Another part of you is watching from the inside, tired, skeptical, and maybe a little ashamed that the first part still has so much power. That split is painful, but it is also the beginning of consciousness. You cannot integrate what you refuse to see, and you cannot stop the chase by force alone. You stop it by understanding what it has been feeding. For some people, the chase feeds hope. For others, it feeds identity. For others, it feeds the old belief that being wanted is the same as being worthy. That last one is especially dangerous, because it can hide inside a very respectable persona. The good woman, the patient woman, the understanding woman, the woman who does not want to be too much, the woman who prides herself on being easy to love. But sometimes that persona is not love. Sometimes it is a mask built around fear. Fear of being difficult, fear of being left, fear of being seen as demanding, fear that if you ask for clarity, you will lose the connection altogether. So you stay soft, you stay accommodating, you stay available. You keep the door half open just in case they decide to return. And slowly, without meaning to, you begin to disappear behind your own goodness. This is where Jung's idea of the persona matters so much. The persona is the face we present to the world. It is necessary. We all need one. But when the persona becomes too rigid, it starts to replace the living self. You become the role instead of the person. You become the one who waits, the one who understands, the one who never asks for too much, the one who keeps the peace at the cost of her own truth. And the shadow grows, because whatever you refuse to claim in yourself does not vanish. It goes underground. The frustration you never admit becomes resentment. The anger you swallow becomes exhaustion. The need you deny becomes obsession. The boundary you avoid becomes a silent grief that sits in your chest like a stone. This is why some women feel ashamed when they finally stop chasing. They expect relief, but instead they feel guilt. They expect freedom, but instead they feel a strange emptiness, as if they have betrayed someone. But often that guilt is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is evidence that you are leaving an old role, and every old role fights to survive. If you have spent years being the one who reaches, the one who repairs, the one who softens the tension, the one who keeps love alive by carrying more than your share, then stopping will feel unnatural at first. It may even feel cruel. Your body may interpret your boundary as danger because it has confused self-abandonment with safety for so long. That is why the first days of no chasing can feel so strange. The hands do not know where to go. The mind keeps drafting messages you never send. The heart keeps replaying conversations as if the right sentence might unlock a hidden door. But the door you are trying to unlock may not be theirs. It may be yours. And the key is not another explanation. The key is a new relationship with your own center. This is the inner marriage. The moment the part of you that reaches outward meets the part of you that can stay with yourself. The moment your longing stops being a leash. The moment your silence stops being a tactic and becomes a return. There is a huge difference between withholding yourself to control someone and withdrawing from a pattern that costs you your dignity. One is manipulation, the other is individuation. Jung would have recognized the difference immediately. Individuation is not about becoming cold. It is not about becoming superior. It is not about turning your heart to stone so no one can hurt you again. It is about becoming whole enough that you no longer need to split yourself to remain attached. That is a much harder work, because it asks you to face the part of you that still wants to be rescued. Not rescued in a childish sense. Rescued from uncertainty, rescued from the discomfort of not knowing, rescued from the vulnerability of being unloved in the exact way you hoped to be loved. The psyche hates ambiguity. It would rather cling to a painful story than sit in a space of not knowing. So it invents meaning. Maybe he is afraid. Maybe she is overwhelmed. Maybe they are about to realize what they lost. Maybe if I stay emotionally open, they will feel it and come back toward me. Maybe the silence means they care too much. Maybe the distance is only temporary. Maybe. And the mind can live in maybe for a very long time. But the body keeps paying the price. Because every maybe keeps the nervous system in a state of suspended hope. It is almost like living with one foot on the floor and one foot in midair. You can do it for a while, not forever. At some point, the body begins to ask for truth, even if truth is painful. And truth often begins with a simple recognition. The chase has become a substitute for intimacy. That is hard to hear, but it is liberating. Because if the chase is a substitute, then you are not losing love when you stop. You are leaving a substitute behind. You are leaving behind the version of connection that kept you busy enough to avoid the deeper loneliness of not being met. And yes, that loneliness can feel terrifying at first. It can feel like a blank room, a night window, a chair that should have someone in it, a message thread that no longer has the power it used to have. You may even grieve the fantasy more than the person. That is normal. The fantasy held a promise. The fantasy said, if you just keep going, if you just keep being the right kind of woman, the right kind of lover, the right kind of presence, then the connection will finally become what you need it to be. But a fantasy is not a relationship, and a relationship cannot be built on one person's relentless effort to keep a door open that the other person keeps leaving half closed. This is where the inner marriage changes the whole emotional landscape, because once you stop chasing, you begin to hear the quieter voice inside you, the one that was there before the anxiety got loud, the one that does not beg, the one that does not perform, the one that can sit in the silence without immediately turning it into a verdict on your worth. That voice is not dramatic. It does not need to win. It does not need to prove. It simply knows when something is no longer aligned. And sometimes that voice does not say, leave now. Sometimes it says, stop betraying yourself to keep this alive. That is a very different instruction. It does not force an ending. It restores your agency. You begin to see that every time you reached for someone who was not reaching back, you were not just trying to connect. You were also trying to soothe a deeper ache, the ache of not feeling chosen, not feeling secure, not feeling fully held in your own life. And once you see that, You can stop making the other person carry a weight that belongs to your own soul's development. That is not blame. That is maturity. The unconscious often arranges relationships as mirrors, not perfect mirrors, distorting ones, but mirrors nonetheless. The person who withdraws may be reflecting your own disowned fear of rejection. The person who stays vague may be reflecting your own vagueness about your needs. The person who keeps you waiting may be showing you how long you have been waiting for yourself to take your own pain seriously. That is the uncomfortable genius of the psyche. It will use another person to make visible what you have not wanted to admit inside yourself. And if you are willing to look, the relationship becomes more than a heartbreak. It becomes a threshold. You start asking different questions. Not, how do I get them to choose me? But, what part of me still believes I need to be chosen to be worthy? Not, how do I make them miss me? But, why do I keep abandoning myself in the presence of uncertainty? Not, what are they feeling? But, what is this dynamic revealing about my own inner split? That shift is everything. Because the moment you move from obsession with the other person to recognition of your own pattern, the spell begins to lose its power. Not instantly, not magically, but gradually, like fog lifting from a road you thought you had lost. You begin to notice the body before the story, the tightness in the throat, the pressure behind the eyes, the clenching in the stomach when you want to reach out but know you should not. The relief that comes, surprisingly, when you resist the impulse to explain yourself yet again. There is a dignity in that restraint when it is rooted in self-respect, not punishment, not games, not emotional theater, just a quiet refusal to keep feeding what drains you. And here is the part most people avoid. The silence you are so afraid of may be the first honest space you have had in a long time. When the chase stops, the noise stops too. And in that silence, you may discover that the relationship was not the only thing keeping you attached. The attachment was also to the role, to the hope, to the adrenaline, to the fantasy of being the one who could finally make love work through sheer devotion. That fantasy can be intoxicating because it gives purpose to pain. But purpose is not the same as truth. Truth is quieter. Truth may simply be that you have been living too long outside your own center, and the inner marriage asks you to come back. It asks you to let the part of you that wants to be loved meet the part of you that knows you cannot be loved well if you keep disappearing. It asks you to let your tenderness grow a spine. It asks you to let your longing become discernment. It asks you to stop confusing intensity with intimacy. And yes, that can feel lonely at first, because the chase gave you movement. It gave you something to do with the ache. But eventually, the movement becomes a circle. You are running, but you are not arriving. The inner marriage breaks the circle. It does not do this by making you indifferent. It does it by making you whole enough to tolerate reality without abandoning yourself inside it. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself. Not for anyone else, just one honest sentence. Let it be simple. Let it be true. Because the first step out of a pattern is often not a grand decision. It is a sentence that stops lying. Maybe yours is, I am tired of earning what should have met me freely. Maybe it is, I do not want to confuse longing with love anymore. Maybe it is, I can feel this deeply without chasing it. Maybe it is, my worth is not a negotiation. Let one sentence become a doorway, and then watch what happens when you stop reaching for the screen, as if it contains your peace. At first, the body may panic. That is normal. The nervous system does not update instantly. It will keep asking for the old fix. But if you stay with yourself, something begins to soften. Not because the other person changed, but because you did. And this is the real turning point. Not when they finally write. Not when they finally realize. Not when they finally miss you. The turning point is when your inner world stops revolving around their movement. That is when the chase ends. Not because you no longer care, but because you no longer confuse care with self-erasure. There is a version of love that makes you smaller. It is often disguised as devotion. It says, if you love enough, wait enough, forgive enough, adapt enough, then the relationship will become secure. But secure love does not require you to exile yourself to keep it alive. Secure love can meet your reality without making you beg for the basics. And if the connection in front of you cannot do that, then the work is not to become more convincing. The work is to become more truthful. That truth may hurt, but it will not humiliate you. The psyche respects truth, even when the ego resists it. Jung's language for this would have been individuation. the slow, sometimes painful process of becoming who you are beneath the roles, projections, and inherited expectations. It is not glamorous. It does not always feel empowering at first. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like losing a story you were deeply attached to. But it is how the self begins to organize your life from the inside out. And when that happens, your relationships change. Not because you learned how to manipulate them better. Not because you became harder to leave. Not because you mastered some strategy. They change because you are no longer asking them to complete what only consciousness can complete. You stop approaching people as if they are the missing piece of your identity. You start approaching them as human beings, limited and real. And that frees you, because a human being can disappoint you, but a fantasy can enslave you. A human being can leave, but a projection can haunt you. A human being can be inconsistent, but a complex can make inconsistency feel like destiny. When you see the difference, you begin to reclaim your life from the invisible script. The inner marriage also means accepting that there is a masculine and feminine pattern in the psyche, not as stereotypes, but as inner functions. The part that reaches, receives, feels, and opens. The part that structures, contains, chooses, and protects. When one side dominates and the other is neglected, the psyche becomes imbalanced. Too much reaching without containment becomes longing without boundaries. Too much containment without feeling becomes control without intimacy. The work is not to kill one side. The work is to bring them into relation. That is why the woman who stops chasing is not becoming cold. She is becoming internally organized. She is letting her feeling nature meet her inner authority. She is no longer asking desire to govern her completely. And that changes everything. Because a woman who no longer abandons herself is no longer easy to pull into an old emotional script. She can still love deeply. She can still feel strongly. She can still be open. But she is no longer available to be lost inside someone else's indecision. That is not hardness. That is wholeness. And if you are in the middle of this process, you may still have moments where the old impulse rises. You may still want to check. You may still want to send the message. You may still want to reopen the conversation just to see if the door is still there. When that happens, do not shame yourself. Just notice it. Notice the body. Notice the urge. Notice the story that arrives with it. And then ask, very gently, what am I hoping this will give me that I have not yet given myself? That question is a small act of inner marriage. It brings the split parts into the same room. It says to the longing part, I see you. It says to the boundary part, I need you too. It says to the wounded child in you, you do not have to earn your place by waiting. That is how a new inner order begins, not with force, with recognition, not with drama, with truth, not with revenge, with dignity. And dignity is not loud. It is the quiet decision to stop treating your own heart like a waiting room for someone else's uncertainty. It is the moment you close the screen and feel the ache without obeying it. It is the moment you walk past the mirror and see not the woman who was left waiting, but the woman who is learning how to stand inside her own life. It is the moment you understand that the real marriage was never meant to be between you and the person who kept you half seen. It was meant to be between the parts of you that were waiting to be reconciled. The part that longs, the part that knows, the part that remembers every time you abandoned yourself. The part that is ready, finally, to stop. And when those parts come together, the chase loses its spell. The phone can stay silent. The night can remain dark. The message can remain unsent. And still, something in you will no longer be lost. That is the beginning of freedom. Not the kind that screams, the kind that breathes, the kind that sits in the quiet room and does not need to prove anything. The kind that can love without chasing, feel without collapsing, and wait without disappearing. My silence is not a game. It is my return to myself. Let that be the sentence you carry. Let that be the line that closes the door on the old pattern. And if he returns, he will meet a woman who is no longer willing to abandon herself to be loved. If he does not return, you will still have returned to the place that matters most. Your own center, your own body, your own truth. And from there, even the silence looks different.